check, check. Okay, this is not check, check. This is not working. Margot, we don't have a clicker, I'm afraid. So you're just gonna have to click through the slides.
Okay.
And my laptop is there. I'm gonna switch it for you. But hope that's okay.
Can I give you a mouse and a dongle for a clicker?
Yes, do you have it? Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Well, hello everyone. Good evening. Welcome to ProductTank. Thanks for taking the time. Oops. Okay, there you go. Thanks for taking the time and coming to our event today. Super excited to have all of you here today. And thank you for those who are joining us online up there. Thank you for joining us as well. So for those of you who haven't been to our events in the past, ProductTank is a largest product community created for product people by product people. And as you can see on the map, we have meetups happening in, I think, more than 200 cities around the world. So wherever you travel, just check our website online, and I'm sure you'll find a meetup. There are multiple ways for you to get involved in the community. The zero one that I haven't put in here is volunteering. So we are always looking for people to help organize these events. So if you're interested, please reach out to me or to any other organizers, and we'll tell you what we're looking for. But you can also speak at one of our product tanks, either in London or somewhere else. We have a form on the meetup page, so you can fill out that form, or also reach out to me at any point. You can also host or sponsor a product tank like Beamery is doing today. So we're always looking for new offices to explore and new places in London to go to. So if your company is interested, please let us know as well. You can also write for our blog, and we also have a podcast, which is really interesting. I really recommend listening to it. But if you're willing to be a guest, then why not try it out? And finally, we also have a community, which is, I believe, now free for everyone to join. So make sure you check it out. It's a Slack community, lots of interesting things happening there as well. We'll be using Slido for questions today. You can either scan the QR code or head to... Hello? Yes, or head to Slido and put these numbers up there, and you'll be able to ask questions or both the existing ones. So yeah, I think scanning is the easiest. Excellent. I'll introduce our host and moderator for today. Tom is a product director at Beamery, and I'll hand over to him.
Hello, everyone. Cool. welcome to our home. Thanks for everyone for joining today and coming far. Hopefully everyone has had pizza and beer and wine. There's plenty more, so please do make sure that you grab some at the end and grab some beers at the end and stay around and have a chat to everyone. So we are your host for this evening. We are Beamery. Woohoo. I wanted to first introduce myself, talk a little bit about what I do, and I'll then talk a little bit about Beamery, because I'm not sure everyone here will know who we are and what we do. So first to talk about me, I'm one of our product directors here at Beamery. I've been here for about a year. I look after some of the back-end systems of our platform. We're a B2B SaaS platform. So I look after our APIs, our data stores. I also look after our AI and data science teams. So if anyone wants to come and talk to me about ChatGPT later, please do. I have some thoughts about it, which will be fun. Prior to that, at Beamery, I was at Tesco for 3 years. I looked after their transactional APIs that powered a lot of the transactions during a pandemic, which was fun. So if anyone wants to know about what happens when everyone buys toilet roll for about 6 months, please come talk to me afterwards. It's a very fun story. And just the first thing I would just like to say is I was looking back at my emails this morning around the first time I attended ProductTank, and I think it was the earliest I could find was 2016. So I've been going for about 7 years or so, which is cool. And I attended lots of minor product conferences as well along the way, had memberships and all that kind of cool stuff. So I think for me personally, it's really, really cool to be able to give back to a community that gave me a lot during my career as a product manager up to where I am now. And I'm hopeful that all of you will gain the same kind of insights and advice that I got through the way of when I used ProductTank. So wanted to talk just a little bit about Beamery, tell you about what we do here. So we class ourselves as a talent lifecycle management system. What that really means is, and first actually to jump back around our mission as an organisation. Our mission as an organisation is to create equal access to work. That's what our founders built the company on. That's our belief still today. And when you think about talent lifecycle management, think about it from everything from a person does not know about a brand to they maybe sign up on a career site, through to being emailed by recruiters, through going through interview stages, becoming an employee, looking at things like career pathing and mentoring and gig opportunities, and then possibly eventually when they're an alumni and how do they get re-engaged with the brand. We build our software to essentially solve that problem for our customers along the way. So think about that full talent life cycle and how there's lots of different really interesting problems to solve along that path. We solve a lot of it with AI and machine learning around data science, around how do we match and how do we make better recommendations. And yeah, we work with some very, very big customers, so likes of Salesforce, Accenture, Amazon, etc. So we're powering a lot of their day-to-day hiring and their day-to-day internal mobility. If anyone wants to know more about Beamery, want to talk to me about AI, data science, anything like that, please do. There is also a lot of Beamery folk here today. So Beamery people, put your hands up, please. Look at this. The majority of them are sitting really close to the pizzas. Which tells you something. So don't just come talk to me. Come talk to everyone else at Beamery. If you want to know more about what we do, or if you want to go and have a snoop around and have a look at what the London skyline looks like at night, because it's very, very cool, especially in some of these meeting rooms. I wanted to just talk about some of our open roles, because, hey, we're hiring, and some of these might be of interest for you. So we have roles across London, Berlin. We also have remote roles available. We have a product operations role open. We have a product designer role open. We have a engineering manager role open. We have a lead data engineer role open. We have a senior front-end engineer open. So if you're interested in any of those roles, or if you are interested in working at Beamery at some point in the future and want to sign up to our talent community, please come talk to me. Also go talk to Verity over there. She's the one waving. I would like to also just stop to say all of this happened because of her. So thank you, Verity. She organised all of this and made it all happen. I simply just turned up and held a mic, so thank you, Verity. And I would also like to say, last thing, health and safety stuff, boring stuff, but we've got fire escapes over in the back if there is a fire. Also, please don't use the lifts because they won't work. And yeah, afterwards we're going to have a Q&A, and please hang around for some drinks and yeah, enjoy the evening. So with that, I will hand over to Daniel Johnson, who is going to talk around growth marketing in this economic climate. So give everyone a round of applause for Daniel.
Thank you. Hi guys, how you doing? Feels like the beginning to an open set. If you're as vain as me, you can go to the windows and take a great selfie. It makes for a great Instagram story, but maybe that's just me. I feel like I'm talking about something kind of depressing, so I need to like lighten up the mood a little bit more. But essentially what I'm going to be talking about is growth marketing. Now, for a lot of people here, they probably know that as growth hacking or have heard of the term. Now, raise your hand if you like the concept of growth hacking. This is a trick question, so I'm kind of curious. Raise your hand if you don't like growth hacking. Oh, this is quite interesting. And raise your hand if you've never heard of the term before. Okay. I'm very curious about the people in between. I wonder what they think. Does this have a clicker itself?
Oh, we have a clicker here.
Oh, wow. Multi-handed.
Sorry.
No. I'm very talented. I can do all sorts without it. Okay, cool. So basically what I want to talk about is growth and how we can use growth and growth marketing processes more effectively in an economic downturn. I don't really use that term. It really feels quite formal. I realize when looking at this and preparing for it, it feels kind of formal because I think we can use a lot of these skills and techniques on a daily basis, regardless of the kind of environment that we're in. So what is growth marketing? I kind of talk about it here, and I talk about it in terms of experiments, but what I really mean is essentially a process of experimentation. When people come back to me, or when clients come to me, very often they say to themselves, hey, we need to grow fast, we've got some funds, but we don't know how to do that. Now, very often that might be a startup who's raised a bunch of money, and they now need to go back to their VCs or their angels and say, here's our plan of action. Because very often they've got a really cool product, but they don't necessarily have a plan to actually get people to use them. Or it might be people who come to me and say, hey, I want to pitch to this VC, but I need some sexy MAUs to do that. But the problem is that for a lot of those companies, they don't actually have much budget and they don't have much time. They have a lot of assumptions based on what they think are going to work and what aren't going to work, but they're not really sure. And they're worried about sticking all their eggs in one basket. That's why I quite like the experimentation process. So I'm going to talk a bit about this, but I'm actually going to show you how the whole process works. Actually, I'm going to take a seat because this is going to be tiring. Cool. So essentially, the way that I look at growth marketing versus more traditional marketing is a process of experimentation. And by that, I mean testing out hypotheses to see if they're true or not. You know, can we validate or invalidate these ideas? I have made some generalizations here for the sake of speed and efficiency, but essentially a lot of people when thinking about marketing think about if you've got a consumer product, for example, a big Facebook campaign. But the problem is it's really difficult to know should we invest time and resource into this campaign without having more data that can sort of contribute one way or another. Everyone with me so far? Cool. If you're really bored or something, like feel free to tell me and we can go into more exciting stuff. So I've got a bit of an old image here, but essentially I use this as an analogy or as an example to talk about companies that have implemented more iterative marketing approaches. I really do need to update it because, man, like in the past 4 years alone, the amount of like crazy growth that has happened, and it's wild. Again, a bit more of an old school technique, but a lot of companies are employing less conventional, less traditional marketing approaches and trying to implement growth further that way. I'm also including this slide, and you guys can take a look whenever you have an opportunity. So essentially, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people have is limited budget and limited time. Now, what I've kind of mentioned before, but what I'm trying to encourage is how can we validate these assumptions with a finite resource and finite time before we before investing too much effort. That's a lot to read. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to introduce a process that I've used quite a few times at my own companies and with clients to try and validate these experiments. So don't worry, we'll go through each slide. This is a big fancy spreadsheet that I created a while ago. The example of this was for a SaaS business, but essentially I'm going to run you through it really quickly now, and we're going to go through different sections. If you're really interested, there is a template that you guys can use and a much more in-depth view that you can take a look at online. So, super quickly, each one of these are an experiment. These are assumptions that we want to test. And we separate it into multiple different areas. And the goal essentially is that people can take a look at this document and know where we are or what we want to test, what criteria we're trying to test, and what our estimated goal is. On this side, we have funnel. So which stage of the user journey is it? What is the specific channel that we're looking to implement? What platform are we using? So this one was customized for our client. Campaign type, depending on what it is. Obviously, description. This was supposed to say subtask. For some reason, it says W. A goal. So essentially, this was how can we, what is the success criteria for us for this experiment? And then we've got impact, confidence, and ease. I'm kind of curious, who's seen that experimentation model before? ICE. Cool? Okay, about 50% of people. So I quite enjoy that. I find it quite useful. It's not necessarily the most data-driven approach, but generally when you're starting out or you're trying to figure out what to do first, it can be very effective. And then over here we have RSP, which is repeatable, scalable, and predictable. And essentially by that we mean, can this experiment, if it succeeds, be repeatable again and again, predictable, we can say with a certain degree of confidence and accuracy that it will continue in the past, repeatable, scalable, and predictable. Yeah, and so you can put in a, say £1,000 in and you'll produce X amount out, and it'll be proportional if you increase the income. Cool, everyone with me so far? Sweet. This makes sense to me, but I'm always worried about, like, does this actually make sense to other people? So what we're going to do now is figure out how does this actually work together. So essentially, when I work with a new company, depending on sort of what the stage is, I try to figure out, also someone needs to tell me about time because I don't want to go way over time or anything like that. So very often, a lot of founders and a lot of people who work in a company, they kind of know what to do or how to do it. They don't necessarily know what to do first. Or more a case of, a consumer product knows that Facebook ads are probably going to be a good idea, but they're not really sure where does this fit in the whole process. And they're so focused on like a few specific channels. What I recommend at the beginning is to just generate lots of ideas. When I'm speaking to clients, I often recommend, suggest the dumbest of ideas, like hiring a blimp with their name on top in London. I don't think I've ever seen a blimp in London. But what that enables us to do, or me to do, is essentially make people feel a bit more comfortable that they can suggest whatever ideas they have. And actually, some of the best ideas have come from customer service. And the goal here is to generate as many ideas. It doesn't have to be very high quality. But essentially, what we're trying to do is figure out what is the rough idea and what is our approach going to be. So as an example, for this SaaS platform, here's some ideas that we had. And generally, this is a period that takes this takes a period of time to develop all the ideas. And this is an iterative process, so don't worry if there aren't ideas on there that you feel later on, we should have included that on there. Here's obviously some example channels that you can use as inspiration. I shamelessly copied this from a book called Traction, which if you haven't read already, I would highly recommend. The next stage is prioritization. Now, I know a bunch of people have seen ICE before, so impact, confidence, and ease. And in fact, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have more comprehensive models that you can use. When I'm doing this for my own projects, I also add gut as a number, gut being gut feel, which isn't very accurate, so I don't use it for clients, but essentially I can generally say with a degree of confidence myself if it's going to work or not. For those who don't know how this works, it's super simple. We fill out a number. Personally, I do somewhere between 1 to 4 for impact. If this succeeds, how impactful will it be? Confidence, how likely is it to succeed? And ease, how much resource, time, and effort will be required in order to set it up? And then what I do is I assemble that and total it next to the experiment. And then I prioritize it based on the numbers at the top. So whatever has the highest number. Everyone with me so far? Sweet. I know it's exhilarating. Also, on this train, on the way here, I realized there is a logical error in my experimentation document there. So I wouldn't use that as gospel. But essentially, once we come up with a bunch of ideas, we then need to figure out if this channel works, how is it going to work? I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of people have is they launch a channel or they launch a campaign and then they realize, actually, I don't really know what I'm looking for. So they don't know if it's going to be a success or failure. Now, just like you did at school, I recommend that you do a really quick experiment. You can do this in a lot of detail, and I know as product leaders, product managers yourselves, you probably do these on a really advanced level. But I recommend doing this on a pretty simple level to validate small experiments so that you know if you want to invest further. This is the basic example you can use. I do actually have a much better PDF, which I haven't attached to this, but I'll send that over if you guys are interested. And then the next stage is essentially test. So once you've developed this hypothesis, so you've got a channel and that you think is going to work, your next goal is to develop the hypothesis. So on the document, you could see, for example, we believe that Facebook ads are going to achieve a less than £2 cost per acquisition for that SaaS company. There are a bunch of different things that you can test, but what I think is really important is actually evaluating the data. Obviously, we all move fast and inevitably break things, whether we like it or not. But I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of people have is actually looking back and thinking, why did this go wrong? Because I think very often it can be quite difficult. And when people talk about particularly marketing, or the way that I sort of see marketing, it's increasingly spreadsheets and just like analyzing data. And if we don't treat it as such, then what happens is we lose answers, we lose data to patterns that can help us understand things in the future. So unfortunately, I don't have any cool graphics that I can use here. But essentially, once you've developed the test, the next stage is to execute, depending on how you want to use the experimentation model. Obviously, make sure that you've got KPIs that are important to you that you're trying to fix or trying to measure. And this slide, I think, is quite important. So I didn't include it in the slide, but I'll maybe include it in an email that you guys can take a look at. The next stage is to systemize that process. So what a lot of people do is they kind of like share this via Slack to someone and then they forget it ever existed. But once you've performed your experiment, I always recommend developing some sort of database. I'm a big fan of creating a wiki and Notion. So every time we've ever created a test, we stick that in Notion and we use that as a way of sort of developing a broad understanding of kind of what messaging, what creative, and what targeting works. And it's really interesting to sort of look at the macro trends of that. But you can do that with your business and see how it evolves over time. And you can see what kind of channels and what kind of creatives resonate. And I find that really useful in regard to pattern matching. But I think the biggest issue that people have is not writing it down and not actually sort of retroactively looking over it and thinking to ourselves. Because I think often, particularly marketing, is often seen as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a creative endeavor, as opposed to a mathematical one. And as such, we don't do that. you can use other ways. I know other companies, they stick it in a Google Doc, and I know one company that actually printed it off and laminated it and currently have it in their office, which is quite entertaining. I think that's the last time I used a printer. Cool, I think that is me. I've got 2 examples here, but they are really, really old school. So ShopRocket was a platform that I used to work with. They were an e-commerce competitor. That was really fun. We managed to get our cost per acquisition to 40 cents CPC through a combination of all sorts of testing. And then Shopify directly started doing exact match bids, which was directly targeting our ads. And that unfortunately didn't work quite as well. After that, I was the co-founder of a mental health app called EQ. And using various growth marketing techniques, acquired 12,000 downloads. It doesn't say in 3 months. And with a sub pound CPA, which I was pretty pleased with, and we had a very high conversion rate from that. But it came from a lot of experimentation to do that. Cool. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been helpful to you guys. Feel free to ask me any questions, or there's a Q&A at the end. Cheers.
Thank you. Yes, reminder, there is a Q&A QR code, so if you haven't taken it already, please take it and ask some questions. I will also ask some questions for Daniel as well. Cool. So I think next we have Joseph to talk around pricing. So everyone please welcome Joseph.
Thank you. My magic clicker. Ooh. Can you hear me at the back? Perfect. Let me use my magic clicker. Ooh, works. So I'm going to chat to you about pricing. It's a bit more focused than the last one, so we can focus in on some issues. So I'll chat about myself and why pricing is important and why you probably haven't thought about it. A bit of theory, but it's not a classroom lecture, so kind of quite high level. And then some kind of tangible stuff that you can do for your own companies. Cool. So I've worked in growth marketing for 16 years. I used to be head of growth at Graze, the nuts and seeds guys. So we were the biggest direct-to-consumer business in Europe at the time. And then we sold to Unilever. The kind of flip side of the positive story is that we had 6 CMOs in 18 months. And we could have sold for a lot more. So I started my own company to tackle that. And we're sort of part consultancy, part recruiter. So we work with founders and investors on growth, and then we hire the team to deliver that. And pricing has been a big part of like getting the companies into better growth. And you can stalk me on LinkedIn. So there's kind of three sort of big things that are going on at the moment at a kind of macro level. So what we're seeing is what I've called the consumerization of tech. So going back to my Graze days, we had 7 engineers. It was pretty hard to build a website. You had to have a lot of knowledge, you had to have a lot of expertise. Now you can literally build Graze's entire tech stack with £200 and probably a day. So that is having a radical change in terms of how businesses are started, how kind of innovation is going ahead, and that's kind of a key change that's happening. And a lot of startups are not tech companies. You can have a business with no engineers. You can run it through no-code platforms. We're seeing the kind of commoditization of performance marketing. So back in the day, you could IPO your business off the back of performance marketing. Now you can't. You haven't been able to for a long time, but that memo has not been kind of widely distributed. So the platforms themselves are automating. They're becoming easier, and therefore the cost of operating is going up. So it's basically not working like it used to, and that's why we're talking about growth marketing. And also we had the end of cheap money. So that era is gone. That's never coming back. It was good while it lasted, but it's gone. So let's just accept that. So if we give you a sort of practical example to talk about kind of pricing and why pricing is important. So this is from my old company. We had a thing called a pre-purchase inspection. So if you're buying a used car, you would get a mechanic to come to your car and check it over, which is a pretty good product, right? You're spending 10 grand on a car, £100 for a mechanic to check it over, kind of works, right? So what I did is I split one product into 3. It's pretty simple. right? It took me about 3 weeks of customer interviews and all that sort of stuff. And it had a pretty bloody big impact. So half of the customers bought the most premium one, because if you're going to spend 10 grand on buying a car, spending an extra 40 quid makes a lot of sense. Very few, if any, bought the bottom one. The product, cool, I've got to talk louder. The conversion went up through the roof because the product is better tailored to different use cases, and it's also clearer to articulate it, and we could also bid higher on PPC. So for 3 weeks' work, you get 115% growth off the back of a couple of interviews and about half a day of tech time. It's pretty simple. So pricing can be huge. Growth people hate the word growth hacking because it implies it's easy, but this is about as near as you can get to a growth hack that actually works. So why is pricing important? So pricing is the biggest single lever you can make. It is the biggest thing you can change. It is often ignored by companies. So most companies have just guessed. They've copied their competitor. They have not thought about it in any meaningful way. It is bloody quick to do. If you're in B2B, it will take you less than a minute to change. The next phone call, you just say a different price rather than the price you had. Simple as that. If you've got a customer website, it's very simple. It is very easy to do. And it's also critical to investors. So whatever investors are interested in, making more money is always a good thing. Make sense? So what are the kind of warning signs that your pricing is wrong, which is an interesting one. So first one is you've never looked at it. So by definition, it is wrong because you have guessed. Because you probably didn't randomly guess the right number. You probably just guessed the number. And you might have done it with a little bit of thinking in terms of competitors, but you've probably just guessed. You're doing some sort of cost plus model. So you're getting some sort of amount it costs you and you're adding some margin on. That's never the right answer, even if you're selling commodities. You're getting no pushback in meetings. People should be pushing back on price. It's important. Or you're getting too much pushback. You've got a single price point, so you're selling a single thing to a single company. Like, there are basically no companies in the world that are very successful that have one price. If you look at Apple, they have lots of different iPhones. They have lots of different kind of bits of memory and stuff on them, and you can spend 400 quid and you can spend well over 1,000, and it's kind of the same thing. And you're selling on price. You're selling on price rather than the benefit. Make sense? Cool. Let's talk about a little bit of theory. So these are probably things that you're seeing day to day, but you don't necessarily know you're seeing them. So if you think about inflection points, so if you go to the supermarket, lots of things have a 99 on them, and we kind of know it's a gimmick, but it still works. And it works because we don't think about pricing in a linear way. We think about it in inflection points. So we don't change our decision making based on a small change. So if you think about a coffee, you know, cheap coffee is like £2, an expensive coffee is like £3, and then like a very expensive coffee is £4. If you want a oak, you know, vanilla latte thing, right? Now we don't change our mind based on like 10 pence, 20 pence. We change our mind based on like a big milestone to be like, okay, this is now more expensive and I'm going to consider it. Possibly a bad example with the coffee, but you get the point, right? So we sort of consider it a bit more. So, you know, £1,000 is suddenly a lot of money, depending on what it is, and therefore we kind of think about it in more detail than we would have done. So think carefully about the kind of thresholds, and the worst thing you can do is to price at the bottom of a threshold. If you're going to go over a threshold, you might as well go a long way over. So £10 is a lot worse than $9.99. If you're going to go over that threshold, you should go right to the bottom of the next threshold, which is probably like $14.99. Make sense?
How do you define the threshold?
Oh, good question. This is how you do it. There's a model called the Van Westendorp, which is a very pretentious name for a fairly simple topic, named after Mr. Van Westendorp. Basically, you ask customers three different things. You ask them, at what price is it too expensive? I wouldn't buy it. At what price is it expensive, but I would buy it? And at what price is it good value? And the short answer is you're probably getting it at expensive, but they would buy it. And different customers will have different viewpoints. And what you do is you put them all in a line, and then you'll kind of figure out at what point people are dropping off. Does that make sense? So like different people will start dropping off at different points to be like, you know what, that's too expensive. So, you know, a holiday to Ibiza, £500, okay, most people think that's good value. At 1,000, a bunch of people drop off. At 2,000, a few more will drop off. At 3,000, more will drop off. And then you can think about, well, okay, we could charge 3,000 or we could charge 500, and it gives you some options. That make sense? And then you go in to the second model, which also has a pretentious name, for a very, very simple model, ironically. You basically go and test the price points with consumers, and you say, what would you do at different points? So would you buy it, yes or no? And then you can figure out kind of roughly what your conversion rate will be. The conversion rate won't necessarily reflect the real life, but it will reflect it kind of directionally. So if it's twice the price, are you losing like half the customers, or are you losing less than half? And you'll have a sense of what your conversion rate will be. That one makes sense? And if you're really fancy, you can do one of these. I suppose one thing I've noted with the other ones is that you can do them very cheaply. So you can build your own survey in like SurveyMonkey or some sort of basic tool. You can get a couple hundred people to do it, and you can have it finished for like 500 quid. So when I worked in consulting, we used to charge 250 grand for that. And now you can do it for 500 quid. So good old startups. And then there's also a model called the conjoint, which is a bit more complex. Basically, when you think about a product, you sort of think about like the product and the price, but the reality is the product has multiple different components. So a coffee is a coffee, but you also have like oat milk or normal milk, and you have like special beans or normal beans, or you have big cup, small cup. So they all have different components, and you don't need to know the statistics because there are websites that will do it for you, but basically you ask people a series of questions and you'll get a sense of how their priorities lie for those different things. So with the click mechanic example from the beginning, what we also did was a conjoin and then looked at the individual components that were highly valued, and then we shoved them in the most expensive tier. So for kind of particularly for B2B and for these other things, it will start to get a sense of, you know, do I want, like, where do customers value these different things? And then you can start to think of like, how do I rearrange my tiers to put stuff in certain areas? Make sense? Cool. So here's some like really practical stuff. Benchmarking. Benchmarking is really easy. So if you look at Click Mechanic, we had the RAC price and we had the other one. So we never actually A/B tested it, but once we removed it by mistake in an A/B test, and the A/B test went down 15%. So it does have a big impact. Customers are looking to understand what the price should be, and particularly if you're selling a product which they don't understand what it is, it's very difficult. How much should I be paying for Beamery? I don't know. I've never bought it before. Whereas if you can use some kind of benchmarking to say, you know, Oracle, I don't know, whatever, some other company charged this and we charge this, then you know you're getting a certain value. So whatever product you have, where you can benchmark it, you help consumers to understand what it is, and obviously make sure you benchmark it against the thing that is beneficial to you to benchmark it. Benchmark against something expensive. Focus on value. I think a lot of people kind of don't understand what they're selling. So you're not selling a drill, you're selling a hole. Coffee shops are not selling coffee, they're selling relaxation. McKinsey doesn't sell projects, they sell certainty. Often what you're buying is not what you think it is. Beamery, your chief HR officer is buying looking good in front of the CEO rather than necessarily the whole thing. Oops, I said it. So you don't necessarily buy what you think you're buying, and therefore if you price it based on a sort of very practical, like I'm selling coffee, that's not necessarily what you're actually selling. And kind of allow customers to self-select. So again, going back to the point around one pricing, there's never the right answer to have one pricing. It's simple, it does drive a bit of conversion, but people will have different use cases, so kind of allow them to show their price sensitivity. So again, the coffee shop has basic coffee and it has super fancy coffee. And if you don't really care, you get super fancy coffee. So almost every product has the same. And if you combine that with a conjoint, you can kind of fiddle with different tiers to stick different things in to make more money. That make sense? So fiddle with your pricing tiers. So just to kind of summarize it very quickly, so pricing is something that we never talk about, but it's massive. It's really, really big. You can change it very quickly. It'll have a big impact. It's quite complex. It has a lot of ramifications, but it fundamentally has a big change. Use the Van Westendorp and the Gabor Granger to kind of help you narrow down on the pricing, and think very carefully about how you kind of sell the product in. So if you think about a bottle of wine in a supermarket versus in a restaurant versus online and being delivered in 4 days, it is the same product, but it is radically different depending on those circumstances. So the kind of circumstance that you view a price is critical to kind of whether you accept it. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. 2 awesome call-outs for Beamery there. Any press is good press. We'll take it. And should you buy a platform? Absolutely. I'm not biased in the least. You absolutely buy a platform. The Slido question QR code, I had some feedback, which is I went through the slides too quickly and someone couldn't take pictures. I apologise for my rapid fingers. So there it is. I'm going to leave it up for an awkward amount of time now, while we organise some of the next stuff. Cool. Yeah, we are just switching presentations, I believe, to allow Margot to jump in. So there we are. I will hand over to Margot now to talk about growth and also talking about some scrappy ways of getting that done. So hand over to you. Everyone welcome Margot.
Thanks so much, Tom and Irina and the rest of the team for allowing us to be here. I'm really excited to tell you guys more today about some super practical tips on how you can grow your products during a recession. Can you guys hear me in the back as well? I'm okay? Cool. Awesome. So in terms of the practical tips, there's 3 that I really want to talk to you about today. First is to navigate the mindset of change. Then is to really refocus on your customer needs. We talked a lot about traditional versus growth marketing. We talked a lot about pricing, but also like the biggest thing around this is what do your customers actually need from you in this time? And of course, how to be resourceful and scrappy, because most of us hopefully work at a startup, and this is a time where you need to be a bit scrappy. But before we get into all that, I'd love to know a little bit more about you and get to know one another. My name is Margot. I help founders and CEOs at early stage companies find their product market fit. I have different experience from traditional marketing in my brand management background, and also tech startups with TikTok and Get Harley, and of course P&G and Whirlpool Corporation as well. And at my last company, I was the first employee, so I really understand what it means to roll up your sleeves and be able to grow the company from there. We were 1 employee to then 60, and in the last 3 years, we grew triple digits and raised close to $20 million in funding, which was really fantastic, and that was all throughout the pandemic. So when you think about a recession and uncertainty, I've lived through all of that, and so now I'm currently advising for Broaden, which is a startup that focuses on generative AI for personalized learning. And I'm going to use some examples of what we do today so that you guys can understand how to practically do this. And realistically, today, I'm here for you guys. So I really have only one ask, and it's for you guys not to be shy, okay? I'd really love to understand a little bit more about you, what you're going through, and so I have a few questions here. I'm hoping for participation. So in terms of everyone, for the first 2 questions, can you please raise your hand? What stage of company do you work with? Anyone seed? Pre-seed? Nice. Series A to B, C to D, E to F, IPO'd. Who works at a startup? Who doesn't work at a startup? Cool, okay, super interesting. Now, what function do you work in? Product? That should be everyone, right? No, sales? HR? Marketing? Tech? Very cool. Any other ones? Okay, covered them all. And if you think about where you are right now with your company, I'd really like to understand, what are you most worried about when you think about recession? And please just shout it at me and tell me all your concerns. Like, what do you worry about most? What keeps you up at night?
Nothing mission critical.
Yep, everyone just shout. Mission critical, yeah? Yep, less work, uh-huh.
Investor growth targets.
Yep. Just shout. Everyone can just yell. Uncertainty.
Yeah, changing customer behavior, which can have an impact on your
Yeah.
product or revenue.
Thank you.
Workforce size.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about your company today, what's the biggest challenge? Mm-hmm. Yep. Acquisition, churn, amazing. So before we jump into all those things that we acknowledge, I just wanted to talk about changing the mindset. Okay, there's a lot of things on your mind, and I really appreciate everyone being here today because, you know, there's looming deadlines, there's all sorts of uncertainty, and I just want to take a moment to just pause and breathe. So please trust me on this. If you feel comfortable, just please close your eyes. And we're just going to take 3 deep breaths all together. And on inhale and exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale. Relax your shoulders, relax your face. Everything's okay. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Okay? Now, the reason we breathe, there's a lot of scientific proven facts about how that changes your mind and how that changes your behavior. And ultimately, in this environment, it's so important just to take a pause and breathe and look at everything. You know, breathing helps reduce stress, it helps improve focus and concentration, and ultimately calms everyone down. And I think if you just kind of first pause and then acknowledge all those different things that are going on, where you have challenges of acquisition, retention, and everything, you'll notice that, okay, you know, there's a lot happening, right? And so what you want to do is you want to focus on reducing the clutter, acknowledging all those concerns that are happening, and realize at the end of the day, when you take a step back and remove yourself from that clutter, you realize, you know, most of you work at a startup, some of you at a corporate, but these are all things and these are all challenges that you would have to be facing anyway. That's a part of being in a business in this environment, that all these issues you have with a recession, likely, you know, acquisition, retention, like that's all changes and challenges you have to deal with when working at a startup, right? So it's important to just acknowledge and then take a step back to realize what's the real challenge you're dealing with rather than what's going on outside. And I think that is a really important way to make sure your team, when you think about morale and retention, they're on the right page and on the right pace of making sure you guys can move forward in the right places together. The second thing is really then focusing on what are your customer needs. Taking that customer first approach, you realize, okay, well, what is happening? How's it different than what should be happening? And are they behaving any differently than what you expect them to versus before? Right? If it's a matter of pricing, if you do change pricing and your customer is quite sensitive to that, how can you change it so that, you know, they can see the value in what you're seeing, right? Does that change the engagement that they have with your product? Does it mean that they're using it more often, they're using it less because they have less time in the day? Does it mean that you're going to get a giant influx of talent, like for Beamery, if a lot of layoffs are happening? So how do you adjust your product and how do you adjust your services to meet the needs of your customers in this environment that is changing? That's the part that you want to be able to focus on, because that's actually what matters and what's changed. And then from there, how do you gather feedback from them? If it's through surveys, if it's through customer support, how do you ensure that you take those feedbacks and add that back in so that you can improve how you go to market? And from there too, you really want to think about retention as well. If you have a leaky bucket and you have customers who keep on leaving, there's really no point of acquisition, right? When you want to acquire customers, you want to keep them within that funnel and you want to keep them happy. The more you can keep your customers happy, the more of a chance you can actually upsell them on other products, on different services that are a part of that. And as you grow price in terms of just the price point of that, you could also grow basket size as well. If there's a second product that you can offer them or an extra feature that you can give them. And then also, how do you think about advocacy as well? Like making sure that your customers, when they're super loyal to you, how do they then give you even more customers in return from a referrals process so that they can give you more organic growth from that sense and really be able to build it from a community standpoint? A quick example in terms of how we captured valuable feedback from Broaden was actually how we launched the Lenny's podcast search. So has anyone heard of Lenny's podcast? Amazing. Really great podcast. What we did here is, with Broaden, the whole idea is that you're creating different ways for people to consume information and consume education for the future of work. And when we launched this, we actually created mini product drops on Product Hunt, where we promoted specific features of the product, and that increased our sign up by 43%. And from there, not only did we get a lot of virality from Lenny's podcast, who actually organically promoted our feature on Product Hunt itself, but it was a great way to get user feedback, right? Like understand what did they actually like about it, what did they not like, and how does that actually change our product launch for the future, and how does that include more and more of those different specific needs for the customers into the product. In terms of being resourceful and scrappy, this is the part that I actually like to have the most fun with, and how to be smart about your spending. There's probably very few things I've ever bought full price. And that's something that as a marketer, I want everyone to know. You should never buy anything full price. There's always somehow a way to get a discount. And that's where, when you're thinking about bootstrap budgets, especially in different stages of your companies, you can ask for discounts. You can actually get a lot of resources for free without having to pay for it. So there was someone I met from Digital Boost. They do free services as well. Make sure you network with them. Like discounts you can actually get from a lot of places. So don't be afraid to ask, because the worst case that happens is that they say no. You can always play the game of like, oh, we're just a startup. We really love your product. Is there a possibility that maybe Beamery can give us a 20% off? Like, Tom, I'm sure can hook you up, right? So don't be afraid to do that. The worst case, they say no, right? With bootstrap budgets, in terms of thinking about growth marketing and experiments, with your existing channels, optimize them, right? When you optimize them, you get better conversion rates. You can get to the right, cost per acquisitions that you want. And when they do get to that point where, they're fully functioning and running, double down on them. They already work. That's a great way to keep pumping in money, but make sure that from there, you're also experimenting more. This is your time to actually be able to build, measure, learn, and really test all these. You're gonna go back to the basics and have a lot of fun with experimentation, and that's actually the part where you want to think about, how can I do more with less money? There's also, not just paid media channels that you can build out and test and learn from, but a lot of organic ones as well. And that's a really fun way to think about, how can you take the resources that you have, if it's more talent, if it's more time, rather than just money to spend on ads, to take it in a different way to get more earned impressions, get more earned media. And that's a really fun way to do that. And I'll give you an example of how that looks like. And of course, lean on your community. If you look around in the room, we have a lot of smart, brilliant people in very different knowledge groups. And that's a really great way to ask other people for help and ask experts for their knowledge on how you can build different organic loops, how you can tackle the different challenges in your problems. Realistically, at the end of the day, there's very few companies that are just one person. And if you want to be, when you're at a startup, it's so important to make sure that you're leveraging your full team. And that team can be partnerships, that team can be growth, and that team can be just the people who are around you. And that's, a lot more knowledge and power that we have there. And here's a great example for Broaden. So with Broaden, we developed a AI newsletter. That's a free weekly newsletter called AI in the Middle. And that's where founders, investors, and builders can learn more about that. And I also, again, need your participation. I need everyone's help here. So there's a QR code on here. I'm going to leave it on here for a very awkward time, so you guys have enough time to actually scan and participate. But show of hands, I need more people to sign up for this newsletter. Who's willing to help me? Anyone? Amazing, thank you. That was most of you, right? And very awkwardly so, most of you. So I really appreciate that. But to be honest, this example really isn't about you signing up for the newsletter. It's actually just about the fact that you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help. It was a very silly example, but look at around you and how many people actually cared and was able to give their time and offer you support, right? That's my point of saying lean in on your community and ask people for help. It's totally okay. That's why we have these events, so you can get to know one another, so you can get to understand different challenges and help each other out, right? It's important to be kind. And so thank you for being kind, and thank you for offering that help, even though it wasn't super relevant. But that's a great example that, it's a super practical way to get more information and get more support. And so your practical tips and takeaways for today, I love for everyone to do again, is just take a deep breath, take a pause, reassess your approach with a lot of calmness, listen to your customers, learn to be resourceful, and really be ready to roll up your sleeves and get through these tough times, because they are tough times. But you can be super smart of how you approach things. And finally, leverage your community. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to meet other people, to see things differently, and be open to all of that, because that's a really great way that you can get new ideas, new insights, be super creative of how you approach things. And that's the exciting part of, being able to be a startup or be a big corporation in this recession environment, to look at it in a different way, to be a bit more positive about it, because there is a ton of opportunity out there. And if anyone would love to connect, please find me on LinkedIn and stalk me on there. But it's really great having you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margot. And this is one thing I learned: if I ever want to buy anything, I need you to do the brokering for me, because I pay full price for almost everything. So terrible. So yeah, good lessons there. What we will do now is we are going to do a Q&A, but I think we're going to allow everyone to have a 5-minute break to grab a drink. There are some cold-ish pizza still, if anyone's still hungry. So the time is 1 minute past 8, so we'll come back at 6 minutes past 8. So you've all got 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about the Q&A. I'll just stand up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'll be sitting down standing up.
Yeah, but maybe what if we put them closer together so you can sit and we'll just pass
Yeah.
You should move here beside.
Oh, okay, fine. I got you. I want a smaller. I'll go on the smaller one here. And I want in the middle. I'll sit on the smaller one. I'm sure I've got a smaller one, but I'll sit in the smaller one. Fine.
Yeah, okay. So,
Cool.
perfect.
Ran it pretty much the time.
Yeah.
down. I'm here. Yeah, I'm on a tiny chair.
Oh, sorry.
I will sit down. I'm on a smaller chair for some reason. Right. Hello, everyone. We're back. Does everyone have a drink? Everyone have more pizza? Everyone made use of our microwave to warm everything up, I hope? No? Missed the trick. All right, so now we're going into our Q&A. So QR code is still there. Please ask questions and please upvote things. And we will go through them. We have I think we've got about 15 minutes or so to go through. So I'll go through as many as I can. I'll also, if anyone wants to shout stuff out, put their hands up and stuff, then please do. And I will hand over to each one of you. I'll pick one of you at random to answer questions. Or please put your hand up as well if you want to answer a question. So the first thing, one of the highest voted questions that I want to just call out because I think it's a big one is quite direct. Thanks for being direct, everybody. What does this have to do with managing products in a recession? So, good question. I think I would probably summarize first, and I'll hand over to our lovely speakers to maybe add some more context. So I think, look, my experience so far, even though we are somewhat in the start or in the middle of a recession, who knows how long these things last, or actually any time during a economic slowdown, or even if you're in a company which is going through a hiring freeze at the moment, right? It's all the same situation. The thinking for me is how do you do more with less? How do you figure out how to be scrappy and how to think differently, right? Because the way you usually grow products is you say, I need a team to build this, right? So you hire a team, and that takes you some time, and that requires funding, or you spend loads of money on PPC, or you spend loads of money on like traditional marketing methods, and in situations like we are in now, you can't do that, right? So when you think about the experimentation methodology that we talked around, that's good for anything, not just advertisement, right? You think about anything you want to do, experimentation is good. If you think about trying different pricing strategies, right? That's a lever you can pull without having to employ anyone or having to do much work. And if you think about really focusing on the value for your customers and being scrappy about the way you do things, and also doing things like Margot did, where she gets people to sign up for a newsletter in the middle of a talk, those are the type of things that are scrappy, and those are the type of things that, as a product manager, I really do believe we are all have to own and have to take advantage of, because no one else is really going to do that, and I think we're set up to do that. But with that, I'll hand over to anyone else who wants to add anything more to that. Yeah, go for it, Joseph.
So I think fair critique on the question there. I think the honest answer is it probably shouldn't be any different. What you do in a recession versus what you do elsewhere, it should be the same. The reality is there's just lack of funding. So a lot of these kind of things are tighter because they have to be. But I worked at a startup during the pandemic. We raised $665 million, and we pissed a lot of it over the wall very, very quickly on pointless shit that we shouldn't have done. Now, we just shouldn't have done that, regardless of the situation. So I think those situations are now over, and we're now being more rational. I think some companies are still kind of on that journey. Just a sub-question for a question.
Do you think your inflection points change because it's a pandemic in pricing?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. I think that the kind of scrutiny of pricing is increasing. So justification of pricing is increasing. The price points themselves, we've also got high inflation as well. So we've got a sort of weird situation of like, we're coming off high inflation and therefore people are expecting prices higher. I think generally this sort of justification for every pound is harder, which can have an impact on those price points. And I'm going to pass back.
I can add to that. Go for it. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I was just kind of going to build to that context of like why this could be important to you guys right now? And I think, it's a very direct question, so I want to give a direct response and not to freak anyone out. I'm going to say it all with a smile. Realistically, at the end of the day, in a recession, what it means is that likely you're going to get a lot of pressure from your investors and, the environment on unit economics and profitability. What does that actually mean for you is that you need to be super smart about how you spend and how you acquire and how you retain, because at the end of the day, you can have a great product that makes no money and, all your customers will love it, but if you don't make any money, the product and the business fails, right? And so that's one of the things you need to think about, like, why are there so many layoffs right now is because the company isn't making enough profitable growth for it to be sustained. So that's kind of why we wanted to talk about how to grow in a smart way during a recession, because it does impact a lot of people, and without freaking everyone out, it is important to think about how to do things in a way that's sustainable and smart.
Was there a question?
Kind of. The audience in the polling, I think a good chunk of the audience were from corporates, where the context is actually quite different than a startup and like startup investors, where the currency that your stakeholders trade on in terms of risk and return starts to shift during recessions. So I'm curious if you guys had any observations kind of through the corporate lens of how that might change the way you manage a product in that kind of environment.
It's kind of not really answering your question, but one thing that I do find quite interesting is that demands for, so I'd say like 70% of our work is with startups and then a bit is with corporates. And I get significantly increased demand from corporates during recessions, like quadruple the leads. And I personally love working with corporates because it's quadruple the money and it's generally 4 times easier than working with startups. But it's interesting how a lot of them are looking for essentially, how do we move like a startup? And, I might give them the skills and the resources and training, doesn't necessarily mean they'll execute on it. But I think kind of in the answer to this question is essentially a lot of companies are bloated and do things inefficiently. And when you work in a corporate, it's everywhere. I think when you're running a startup, it's often you're emotionally vested in the success or failure of it. So you're able to prioritize a bit more ruthlessly. And recessions give us an opportunity to do that. But yeah, it is interesting because a lot of what I talk about is from a corporate perspective. So I'm curious almost as well.
And in terms of from a corporate perspective too, I've had that background of big corporate marketing and working at actually the largest toilet paper companies in North America with Irving Consumer Products and P&G, toilet paper being very topical during the pandemic. The things that actually changed during that time is when you're working at a corporate, the amount of time it takes you to do anything is so long. I don't know if anyone else feels that same way, but even just to launch a product would at least take 9 months to a year. And that's actually what frustrated me of working at traditional corporations, but at the same time, great foundational learning and, great place to start. But at the end of the day, your ability to adapt to what your consumers' needs are so limited that you do need to stay so close to what your consumers want, right? At the end of the day, if the demand increases for toilet paper, but you don't have the production capacity and you don't have the manufacturing capability to pump that out, that actually means that you're not capturing as much profits and as much revenue as you want, and you're
Price gouge.
Exactly. You could totally price gouge if you wanted to, but it's harder too because the changes of how you, the pace of which you can change things is so much slower than what you can traditionally do. It's a really good time to reevaluate how you go about and how you actually bring products to market, right? Because the more agile you can be, the better you're going to be able to capture all of that arbitrage.
There's an interesting analogy as well when you look at kind of bootstrap founders versus VC-backed founders. So in some respects, they should be the same. They're both building businesses. And previously, that gap between them in terms of how they think is radically different. I think now it's emerging. It's combining. So bootstrapped have product market fit always. They're always profitable. They're always critical of do I need this person? Do I need this thing? And the VC-backed startups are now behaving a bit like that. And I think that's tough because a lot of people are losing their jobs, but also that's the kind of more sustainable. So I think that's a sort of different analogy.
Awesome answers. Thanks, guys. So now looking down the list, I'll go to Daniel next. So someone is asking, what's the difference between the ICE confidence and your extra gut metric?
So the gut metric is essentially, it's like an addition when I'm really sure about something for generally internal projects. So I can just increase the confidence, but I don't like increasing it above 4 because then it messes with the maths in my Google Sheets model. So that's like my gut feeling. Again, I wouldn't apply it necessarily with clients, but generally, for example, if it's an e-com client and we're doing a paid acquisition campaign and I know the audience and I know the creative, I know what's going to work or not. So for that, I want to prioritize that because that has a significant chance of achieving a goal that we want.
Has the experiment changed your gut feel?
Oh, all the time. I'm wrong all the time. Like, I'm astoundedly, I'm wrong majority of the time. And I think my gut, I've relied less and less on my gut feel. Because there's been times when I've been like, oh, this is preposterous. I know exactly what the result's going to be. And then I'm like humbled because I'm wrong. And the data that is proven to be true for so long turns out to be incorrect for this use case.
All right, now to you, Joseph. We have a question around pricing. So the question is, what do you use the same approach when pricing B2B products as B2C, and what would you do differently? I think a good example here is Beamer's products B2B, and we don't often know what our competitors charge. So therefore, for new products, we always feel like we're somewhat in the dark, and it's all a bit of a guessing game to an extent. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on what the differences and strategies are there.
It's a good question. So B2B, so in theory, they're pretty similar. The reality is it's partly a transparency issue, so you don't know what people are charging. It's partly a sample size issue. And it's partly a sort of transparency in terms of like consumer price testing at scale is quite difficult because it's often legal to test multiple prices. So you have to sort of estimate it at a different level. So it can become, so B2B can be quite easy, but you don't necessarily have a representative sample. So you just tell your sales reps, right, today we're going to do twice the price and we'll see what happens. So you can get real learnings very quickly in a qualitative way, but your sample size is not massive. Whereas with B2C, it can be difficult legally. So in the US, it's illegal to test multiple prices. So you kind of have to do it through research. So in theory, it's the same, but the reality is like some of the kind of the methodologies can be different. I suppose the other thing with B2B is that they are humans that you're buying from. So they do think in a similar way, and therefore it can be very similar, particularly if you're doing B2B at kind of SME level, you know, whether you're a founder buying, I don't know, a subscription for £200, it's not a million miles different from buying a coat for £200. Yeah, hopefully that's a good answer.
Tom, can I ask you a question on pricing for your competitors? Sorry, I'm just trying to understand. So you're saying that you don't understand your competitors' pricing.
To be clear, we do understand our competitors' pricing. However, we with B2B, there's always an aspect of competitors will discount all over the place to get their customers in the door, right? So then it's always a bit of a guessing game versus what the shelf price is versus what the actual price customers are getting, because it is all, as you say, negotiable, right? Yes. So the shelf price of a product rarely is the price that we think the market actually pays for the product, which then adds a level of complexity onto understanding.
I love it, and it's more of a reason for you to ask for discounts for other things as well. But also, like, I think, to your point of like knowing what the, RRP is versus what people are actually getting, it's also fairly easy enough for if you're like talking to a prospective customer from a B2B side, to just ask them, right? Like, if you're interested in like this other competitor, what price did they offer you, right? I think that's a good way to get to know your customers and do that market research, which again is super important during this time, to know where you stand.
Thank you. I will definitely ask for discounts on anything now. All right, so we have time for a few more questions. I want to make sure everyone has time for last beers and some networking before we finish. I have a question about experimentation. I'm a bit of an experimentation geek myself. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Someone has asked, when you run lots of different experiments at once, how do you ensure the effects of one aren't impacting the results of the other?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the easy answer to that is don't run like a few that aren't going to affect each other. Experiments is a very broad term, and it depends on kind of what you're testing. If you're testing one thing that might affect another, you can obviously take that into account in your model. But the other is test things that don't necessarily have an effect on each other. And also have a look at sort of the statistical significance, because perhaps if it does affect each other, it might not be impactful in the ultimate conclusion. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I tend to test as quickly as possible because there is often a lot of different things to test. So you want to kind of go through the variations so you can do the next fun thing.
Cool, thank you. Right, I'm going to pick one last question. Do we have any questions in the audience of anyone that wants to ask anything? Otherwise, I will pick one at random. No? Okay, we're going to have the last one, I promise, and then we can stop. So, so this was last one about pricing, because I think we had a lot of questions about pricing today. It's a very topical thing, which is quite interesting. Someone has put, I love the process, so kudos. But what's the best way to choose V1 pricing? When you don't have a product on the market, there's nothing like it that exists today. How do you then choose what the price of a product should be?
Interesting. So I think pricing, you can choose the price well, you have to choose a price, but you can do some sensible thinking about price before you have significant volume. A lot of companies say, well, when we're bigger, we'll deal with it, but actually you can deal with it at a kind of very early stage. I would do kind of mum test interviews with customers to understand kind of how they think about it, and basically what they benchmark you against to see what category you're in. If they benchmark you against something which you don't like, or think about, well, you don't like it because it's cheap, like how do you benchmark against something that's more expensive, and how do you kind of think about that? And often it's related to what you're selling and what you think you're selling are often different. So I try and sort of understand where their kind of benchmark is, and then see what you can do to benchmark it. And then you can think about how you kind of position your marketing to position it as a different area. There's always some benchmark in their mind. It doesn't necessarily, even if you're selling, day one of Beamery, there's still something there. And if you can do a sort of back of the envelope calculation to say, you spend, I don't know, X hundreds of thousands of pounds on recruiters, you spend you can try and like create your own benchmark, even if you are selling a totally unique product that no one's ever sold before. So you basically want to get a benchmark, and then you want to sort of try and push them to a benchmark which is better. And then ideally you're a better product that's slightly cheaper than whatever it is you're trying to compare yourself against.
Should that be in this particular case where it's completely a new product and you're trying to price it? Should you consider the pricing should be more than your cost price as a benchmark so that you don't really lose out?
Yes. I suppose for SaaS, like your price benchmark is sort of, your cost benchmark is, basically your cost is pretty irrelevant as long as you're not making a loss. So you're kind of, one of the things I said was don't have a cost, you cost and then you add 20%. That never works as long as you're making a profit on it. I think you want to try and like create your own benchmark to do it. And then you can do things like, I bet you guys are doing like, only £5 a month per employee rather than like, give me £500,000, right? I imagine that's a better sell for your salespeople. That's what you're doing, right?
You do now.
Okay. I'll train your salespeople.
Sorry, how do you kind of test that combination of like messaging versus price? Like you were saying, if you sell something that says this is a product that's X pound, but if you say this is a life-changing experience, suddenly you get a higher price. So in your laddering, kind of, how did the messaging kind of concept play? Did you fix the messaging first and then test the price, or did you test messaging and then attach the price to it?
In terms of the click mechanic example.
Yeah, well, you had those three levels. It's kind of like, were you taking the messaging that was already there and then trying the pricing, or kind of just how did you think about that?
So we did customer interviews to see kind of what they valued, and then we basically sort of looked at a conjoint of adding the kind of most expensive stuff to the top. To answer a slightly different question, which is also useful, is your price has to be seen in the context of the situation. So if you can't really explain what your product does, every time you do pricing research, you're going to get a much, much lower number than they think about. So you have to do your kind of qualitative customer interview alongside your pricing, because Beamery's got sort of lovely branding. If the branding was shit, people would be willing to pay a lot less. So if you do a lot of research, you're kind of artificially doing it a bit lower. And if, particularly in an early stage where you're sort of not really clear on what the value is and who the customer is, you're probably undercooking it. So I suppose when you do research, you just got to bear in mind the context. Otherwise, you'll massively undercook it. Because if you don't know what a product is, you're just going to go low. Whereas if you're crystal clear on what it is, it's got a nice articulation, you've got the benefits, blah, 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 nice branding, nice situation, your price mark is going to go significantly higher.
Thank you. I've put my phone down. So that's it. That's the end of the questions and the end of the our lovely speakers talking. So we've had Joseph, Daniel, and Margot. Give everyone a round of applause for today. And we have more drinks here. We have more wine. We may have more pizza. I think there is a hard close at 9 p.m. Is that right, Verity? Yeah, in half an hour. But there is a pub downstairs across the road called the Artillery Arms. So if anyone wants a pint or a soft drink afterwards, then please head down there. But say hello to everyone. And thank you all for today.